Hello, my name is Nathan Myers, and this is a video associated with Political Science 415 and 515 Public Policy. So in this discussion, we're going to talk more about actors in the public policy process. Previously, we've talked about different types of public policy and kind of how ideology fits into which side politicians will choose to take on a particular issue. But another important element, if we're focusing on this example of the Bibbs administration with President Pamela Bibbs, who's a Republican president. So we talked about kind of the policy positions that were assigned to her and how some of those positions made sense and some of them didn't based on her ideological and political party affiliation. So I want to take a little bit of a different tack with today's discussion. We're going to focus on policy actors and thinking about how a president like Pamela Bibbs might choose to staff some of her more important cabinet positions. So there are currently 15 cabinet level positions in the executive branch at the federal level. So among those, I would say the four that are largely considered to be the most important are the State Department, the Treasury, the Justice Department, and the Department of Defense. Those tend to be what most presidents consider to be their inner cabinet because they're dealing with those issues that are of highest priority. You know, if you know, internationally, if we end up in a conflict with another country, it's going to be the State Department and potentially the Department of Defense that are going to be involved. If there's an economic catastrophe of some kind, the Treasury Department obviously would be point on dealing with that. And then the Justice Department, in terms of day-to-day law enforcement in the United States, is very important. So those are very high-profile positions. So if you go into the game, the political process, after kind of looking at the policy profile of President Bibbs and kind of making decisions about, what should she support and what shouldn't she support, you can go into this departments tab and it gives you the 15 cabinet level departments and it gives you choices as to who should be selected to staff those departments. So you'll note that it gives you age, it gives you a percentage of policy agreements. So that gives you an indication of to what extent this person agrees with President Bibbs on a variety of issues. You can see this individual's fiscally conservative and socially very conservative. Now, for a Secretary of State, that may or may not mean as much. It also gives you the percentage of experience and kind of a brief summary of the individual's resume. So at 99%, this is obviously somebody who is considered to be highly qualified, has a lot of experience. So if we're looking at this Chuck Mercer to start with, 56 years old, so old enough to have been around for a while, but not so old that they're going to be getting into issues with health and things like that. Policy agreement could be a concern since the policy agreement's only at 49%. But this kind of gets into the idea of, do you want to have a cabinet full of people that agree with you on pretty much every issue, or do you want to take kind of the team of rivals approach? And this was an approach that Lincoln took when he was in office, the idea that rather than surrounding himself with people that all agreed with him and liked him on a personal level and all of that. He actually selected a lot of people to his cabinet that didn't agree with him on a number of issues and were actually very skeptical of him when he was elected president. And Lincoln's idea was basically, you need to have a variety of different viewpoints, and a president needs to hear from people that aren't necessarily in his or her corner. They need to hear from people that, in some ways, might be the opposition or might be political enemies to some extent. And this was also, done in the FDR administration, and some subsequent administrations have certainly included people in the cabinet that were of the opposite party. Recently the Obama administration, had secretaries of defense from the Republican Party and so forth. So that's a consideration. So considering age to some extent, the level of policy agreement, and obviously the level of experience. So though that's what the game is giving you in terms of information. So that's kind of the basis on which you would make a selection. We go into State Department. Let's see. That just gives you a little bit more information there. And I think also there is an option where you can select who your who your department heads are going to be, who your cabinet is going to be. So there's a mode in the game where you can actually select who your Secretary of State is going to be, who your Secretary of the Treasury is going to be. So if you compare the Treasury Secretary to the head of the State Department, again, you've got Aline Halbert. She's also 56 years old, interestingly enough. Policy agreement is actually lower and experience is a little bit higher. So based on this, these are the people that President Bibbs selected to be in her cabinet. She's clearly prioritizing experience over ideological agreement. Some administrations would go the opposite way. Some administrations would tend to favor policy agreement over experience. They would want people that are going to execute on the policies that they prioritize in a way that they want them done. So we'll go down here, look at Department of Justice. So we have Wesley Adeleke, age 66. So a little bit older, but still, not outside the area where, there would be concerns about health and things of that nature. Still has a lot of energy to do the job. Policy agreement's a little bit higher, 51%. Again, in the conservative to very conservative ideological realm. So part of the reason why you're seeing lower levels of policy agreement, I think, are because we're using the randomly selected policy option. So if we had actually gone into the policy profile for President Bibbs and consciously selected the conservative positions for all of the issues, those policy agreements would be a lot higher. Since it was the policy positions were randomly selected, you're only seeing about a 50% agreement. And again, highly experienced And one other thing you'll note if we just look at these three individuals, you can see there's some diversity here in terms of their personal characteristics. Um, you have a white male Secretary of State, you have a woman as Secretary of the Treasury, you have an African American man as Attorney General. So that's also a consideration in terms of cabinet selection. Are you going to have a cabinet that is demographically diverse so that people get a sense of, you know, you're bringing in, a variety of points of view, not just ideologically and not just in terms of profession, but in terms of lived experience. Are you bringing in people whose life experiences have been different and that shows the same kind of diversity that the country has? If the cabinet is very homogeneous, does that send a message to the general public that you're not necessarily interested in considering all different points of view when it comes to international relations or criminal justice or economic issues? So the next one I wanted to look at in terms of being in what I would consider to be the inner cabinet would be Secretary of Defense. And this is Luther Prasad. And he is actually on the younger side compared to the other ones. He's in his early 50s. Policy agreement is low, and actually experience is a little bit lower as well compared to the other ones, although partly that may have to do with the age difference. He just hasn't been in government quite as long. But again, it appears like Secretary Prasad is probably of East Asian descent. So you have demographically a little bit of variation there in terms of projecting an image of diversity. The policy agreement is pretty low, which could be problematic when you're dealing with defense issues, because when presidents have to kind of deal with defense policy, there's a lot of individuals that they have to negotiate with. There's the Secretary of Defense and the Defense Department. There's the Joint Chiefs of Staff. There's the secretaries of the different branches of the military. So there's a lot of different actors involved. And sometimes those actors are unified in their positions and sometimes they're not. But it could be argued that in terms of the Defense Department, you might want a Secretary of Defense that's a little more aligned with your point of view, given that you're going to have to negotiate with all of these other actors. So that's just one potential point of consideration. So in terms of what these positions do, it kind of gives a summary. But obviously, as we said, State Department representing the nation in foreign affairs and international diplomacy, engaging in acts of diplomacy, including negotiating treaties and agreements with foreign nations. So, obviously experience would be valuable there. And if the individual is representing the Bibbs administration to other countries, you do want the Secretary of State speaking with the same voice as the rest of the administration. In other words, you don't want a Secretary of State communicating one thing when the president wants to communicate something else. So that would be potentially an issue in the policy agreement framework. Department of Treasury, works with printing money, collecting taxes, supervising banks, and providing fiscal policy recommendations. So, again, policy agreement would be useful, but I would say here, given the responsibilities involved, experience would probably be more highly valued. And if there were policy disagreements, those could probably be handled more behind the scenes. The only thing would be if there were a major event like what happened in 2008 with the Great Recession, if there were severe policy differences, those could come into play in those kinds of situations. But generally, I think that would be a position that you might want to think about experience over agreement. Uh, Department of Justice, like we talked about, this is the federal law enforcement department, jurisdiction over FBI, DEA, runs the federal prison system. So again, experience would be valuable, but also I think agreement is going to be important as well, because criminal justice issues, policing issues, corrections issues are very hot button topics in the United States today. So you would definitely want somebody who, when they go out and make statements, when they go out and make speeches, are communicating the same ideas and the same information as the rest of the administration. And then we talked about kind of, agreement versus experience in terms of the Defense Department, managing and coordinating all branches of the military, including the Army, Navy, and the Air Force. That's a very brief, simple summary, I think, for what the Secretary of Defense actually does. There's a lot of policy making and policy recommendations that happen in the Department of Defense, a lot of decisions about military contracts and things like that. So it's a very, very important position. And this would be one where I would question, whether somebody with a 44% policy agreement with the president should really be in that position. But these are some things to think about in terms of policy actors in the system, and how to think about how presidents select their secretaries of defense, the personal characteristics, their background, their level of agreement with the president on issues, and their experience. So I hope you found this interesting. I would like you all to comment on what you think, as far as what characteristics should be most important to selecting a cabinet official, and if you think any of these cabinet officials should be switched out, if any of these choices should be changed, and what basis you would use for making those changes. So if you have any thoughts on that, feel free to make those comments either to the YouTube video or make comments in Twitter or LinkedIn or any of the other social media platforms. In the meantime, that's it for now, and thanks very much for watching.